Hi, good evening. What a privilege to have all of you here. Thank you for coming and thank you for trusting us with your time. We know how precious time is. So we do believe that it's going to be worth your time coming out here tonight. Just a quick little introduction on Breath of Life. This is a health and wellness center that is completely non-profit. We don't sell anything. We don't promote any products. It's simply to provide information to our local community so that you can take control of your own health and live a long and happy and well life. We are Christian, but even if you are of a different conviction, we do believe that this will be a blessing to you and that you will still find the information very useful. My husband, John De Beer, is unfortunately not here tonight. And he has asked that I please convey his greetings and apologies to all of you for not being able to be here. So just a little introduction of myself. I'm Adele Becker. I am a pediatrician. Now you're going to ask, why do a pediatrician talk about gut health? And it all started probably about just less than 30 years ago when I was in my late 20s and in training, and I picked up an infection in the pediatric ward, a normal viral infection that kids won't even know they will have a fever for a few hours, and it triggered an autoimmune response in my body, and I suffered for many months with a severe arthritis. And being desperate not to have to escalate my treatment to immunosuppressants and corticosteroids, I went on a journey of research. And I found a few articles from the Scandinavian countries on diets and arthritis. And I thought, well, it probably can't kill me, so I will try this plant-based diet and see where it leads. And 6 weeks later, I was off all medication, pain-free, no swelling, back to normal. And that really set me off on a journey of always being very interested in lifestyle health and nutrition. And throughout my career, that has always been my focus. And even though I'm not currently practicing as a pediatrician, I have been promoted to full-time mom. We have 4 children. I am still always busy reading up and researching something in the area of lifestyle and nutrition. So just a disclaimer, we are not here to take the place of your medical practitioner. So this is not medical advice, this is information only. So please don't go make changes without checking in with your medical practitioner. Just also want to invite you, if you have any specific questions, please come and see me during our break, and afterwards I'll be happy to chat with you. And where I can help, I will happily help. And when I can't help, I will just say, don't know. So this is a very vast topic, and I'm trying to condense it in only 2 hours, which is very little. So we have some people in the medical sector here as well. So I do hope that, where are you? I don't see you. Oh, there you are. I do hope that it will be helpful for you as well. So I'm going to try and find a balance between giving them some extra information and to make it consumable for somebody who doesn't have a medical background. Okay, so just to carry on, I would just like to start with a slide that you will be familiar with if you attended our cancer talks. And that is the question, who do you listen to? It's important to ask that question because nowadays we are so bombarded by information that comes through social media and all these channels, and everybody says something different and becomes extremely confusing. So tonight here, I want to encourage you to just understand that just because something is said over and over and over again with great confidence and very loudly doesn't mean it's necessarily true. I have spent countless hours researching the information that I'm going to share with you tonight. This is scientifically factual. And although with the cancer talks, with everything I said, I showed you the studies, I showed you the proof. For time's sake, I'm not going to do that tonight. I will show you a few of the studies though. but I just want to assure you that this is properly researched. And some of the things may be a bit contradictory from what you hear on social media, but yes, try it out and you will see. The proof is in the pudding. So, gut disorders is very, very common, and 40% of the overall population will struggle with some degree of gut disorder. Irritable bowel is very, very common nowadays. About 10 to 15% of people will have symptoms of irritable bowel syndrome. Constipation, about 12% of the population will suffer with constipation. And constipation is a serious thing. People think it's just discomfort. It's much more than that, because if you're constipated, it means that your transit time is reduced, and potentially toxins are sitting against the lining of your gut for hours and hours and days and sometimes weeks, and that increases your risk for all kinds of things, but including cancer. So we do want a quick transit time. We don't want to be constipated. And then gastroesophageal reflux disease, also very, very common nowadays. So up to 20% of the population suffer with gastroesophageal reflux. And what I don't have up here is inflammatory bowel disease. That's your Crohn's and your ulcerative colitis. That is stabilized at about 1% of the population in the Western world. But it is rising in our younger population. Children are now being diagnosed with Crohn's and inflammatory bowel disease. So that is a concern. And what is interesting is that in the third world countries, as they are westernizing and adopting a Western diet, inflammatory bowel disease is escalating in those communities, while previously it was virtually unknown. So it is a significant problem, and I'm sure many of you who sit here tonight may have some degree of gut unwellness, and that's maybe why you are here tonight. So normally when you do a talk, you kind of build up to something and then you come with a climax. I have decided to actually not do that and just give the spoilers right from the beginning so that you can follow those specific terms throughout the talk. So we know that inflammation is the basis of many of the diseases we see today in our lifestyle. And that doesn't just go for gut diseases. If we look at autoimmune diseases, arthritis, many cancers, etc., inflammation is the underlying fire that makes it boil and brew and grow. You're going to hear the term dysbiosis, which basically means that your gut microbiome has been unbalanced. And the balance between the different microbes that lives in your gut has been disturbed, and therefore it feeds into a leaky gut and into inflammation. Okay, so your gut, if there is a disturbance in your microbiome, that will feed into the gut being leaky. We're going to look a little bit more at that. It's going to feed into your immune system being activated and causing chronic inflammation. So these three terms, inflammation, dysbiosis, and leaky gut, you're going to hear throughout the presentation. So give some attention to those. So, and if there were kids here, I would have said, you have to count how many times you hear this and you'll get a prize. So, okay, so most of us are very familiar with the anatomy of the gastrointestinal tract. But I'm going to run through it just for completeness sake. I'm going to go through it very, very quickly. And just to start off, just to make sure that we all know, what is the function of digestion? It simply is to take the food that you eat, to break it down into the building blocks, let it be absorbed into your system so that your different cells in the organs can reassemble those building blocks to rebuild and to renew and to keep things going. It also is in the process of releasing supporting nutrients like your antioxidants, for instance, and get that to your different cells so that your cells are not only fed but actually nourished, and you can flourish. You can do well with a healthy body. So it's more than just feeding, it is nourishing your body and your cells. Okay, so one thing that I just want to point out here, as you now realize, is that everything is connected. Our bodies are not just one system. We tend to, in today's modern world, think, okay, the cardiovascular system is separate from the gut, which is separate from your endocrine system, which is separate from your pulmonary system, and which is separate from your central nervous system, but it's really not. They are all connected. And it's so important that we keep that in mind as we think of our health and our well-being and the decisions that we make from day to day. So, are you ready to embark on a wonderful journey on how beautifully our bodies are designed? It really blew me away once again when I looked at this and just thought, we serve a creator who knew exactly what he was doing. So, let's start with the mouth. That is where it all starts, and we have a dentist here, so she will agree that we often forget how important our oral health is in our general well-being. I'm going to go through this just very briefly. Obviously, it's important to be able to grind our food before we ingest it so that it can be absorbed. And it's not the only thing, though. The digestion already starts in the mouth. Because we have enzymes who start the digestion of carbohydrates in our mouth already. It's called amylase. So that's why it's so important to chew well. It's not only to make your food finer, but it's also important to start mixing it with the necessary enzymes already in your mouth. And even if you have a smoothie, chew your smoothie so it can start digesting. Okay, so your mouth also has a microbiome that lives in it. And that is really important for general health. Oral health is very strongly linked to all kinds of diseases. If you have poor oral health, you may expect to develop cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, and rheumatoid arthritis. They're all directly linked with oral health, including cognitive decline. And there's a very interesting study that actually showed that people who floss every day has a lower rate of dementia. So look after our teeth. And there's a very interesting fun fact that I want to share with you. The microbes in our mouth produces nitric oxide, which is a gas that we inhale and then filters into our body from your lungs, and it controls the dilation of your arteries. So people who have dysbiosis, so have abnormal microbacteria in their mouth, or people who use mouthwash can have hypertension because of that. And it's actually a study that has showed if they stop this mouthwash use and they just look after the oral health by normal, proper cleaning and flossing, that after 3 months, a significant percentage of people's blood pressure start normalizing. So that's just something very interesting I thought I'll share with you. Other interesting thing is nose breathing is important, because if your mouth breathes, you'll dry your mouth out, and it's not what your oral microbiome wants. It wants to be moist. So if any of you struggle with mouth breathing, especially during the night, which is your longest period of time, make some work of it. Okay, so moving on to the rest of our gastrointestinal system. As you've chewed, you swallow, it goes down your esophagus into the stomach. In the stomach, there's acid that continues to the digestive process, especially for the proteins. Also very important to stop infections, because it breaks down bacteria that you may have ingested, may be bad for you. And from there, it also activates some of the enzymes already that we need, and some in our stomach. And from there, it actually goes through into your small intestine. Now, we've also always learned that our small intestine is the most important part, because that's where all the absorption happens. That's partly true. Most of our absorption happens in our small intestines. And that is why your small intestine is 6 meters long. That's really, really long if you have to take that out. But it actually gets better. So this is just cut through. So if you look at the surface in your small intestine, it actually has little villi, what we call villi on it, which is finger-like structures that sticks out And on those little fingers, there are even more microvilli, small little structures. And that increases your surface area so that you can absorb nutrients to about 35 square meters. That is very, very big. Isn't it an amazing design?
Yeah.
I think so. What is very interesting, though, is that the intestinal layer is paper thin. It is only a single layer of cells that sit there. So as you can imagine, a single layer of cells is quite vulnerable. Now, they are packed next to each other like bricks, like you would build a wall. But to make sure that there are no gaps where things can escape through that shouldn't go through, there are little structures called tight junctions. They are special proteins that are there to bind these intestinal cells together. And they are very, very important because not only they don't seal it completely, but they have the job of being selective to allow certain nutrients to penetrate through those little junctions, water and electrolytes and nutrients. And if those tight junctions are damaged, we sit with a problem because that is when partially ingested nutrients which is not ready to enter your system, or toxins or bacteria that lives in your gut can enter your system and then cause a whole cascade of inflammation and problems in your body. And when we talk about gut permeability or leaky gut issues, this is what we're talking about, is these tight junctions that has been damaged. Now, what happens if your tight junctions is not working and you have a leaky gut? Well, basically, our guts are very, very strongly connected to our immune systems, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit more later. But when our immune systems are triggered in the wrong way, it triggers a whole cascade of many things. One of them can be food allergies. So that is why food allergies can develop not just in children, but right throughout your life. So if particles that is not fully digested escape through, your body will recognize it as foreign, and it may produce antibodies, and then you may sit with an allergy against certain foods. Also, if partly digested proteins, we call it peptides, escape through there, your body may recognize it as foreign. And what is interesting is that some of those peptide combinations may actually correspond to proteins in your own body. And your immune system can get confused and say, this that comes in here is foreign. I need to destroy it. But hey, I've seen this somewhere else in my body. I need to go and attack that. And that is how autoimmune diseases can happen because of a leaky gut. That is pretty scary. Okay, and then also just that constant leaking of foreign materials and foreign toxins or whatever into your body can trigger chronic inflammation in your body. And that is when you experience things like exhaustion and you don't know why you're so tired, and brain fog, and these stiffness and aches and pains in the mornings that you don't really know where it comes from. That vague symptoms, maybe some digestive issues that you're like, what is going on? Something is just not right. And usually that just not right feeling tells you that there is some degree of chronic inflammation happening in your body. So that is why it's so important for us to look after our tight junctions, our gut permeability, and that layer that lies there. So what can cause these disruptions? Any local inflammation, like an infection, for instance, can cause a disruption for a period of time until it has healed up. Alcohol, unfortunately for you, it does definitely cause disruption of your gut barrier. 1 glass a day is enough to cause gut disruption. Non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, that we pop. So for every ache and pain, we pop an anti-inflammatory. Within hours, it disrupts your gut barrier. So we need to be a little bit conscious of what we pop. Ultra-processed diets, it's a definite. We're going to look more into that a little bit. And then any microbiome change can cause disruption, and you'll see later why. And even something like just poor sleep and stress can cause disruption of your gut barrier. So we really need to look to more than just our food and actually our whole lifestyle, because this is such an important part of our gut's integrity. Okay, but the good news that we do have is that the turnover of our gut lining is extremely fast. Every 3 to 5 days, you have a completely new gut barrier. So the good news about that is that you can bring healing to your gut if you do everything right quite quickly. The bad news about it is that bad decisions, even only for a day or 2 or 3, can have an impact on your gut for the next few days until your gut barrier has renewed again. So that is just an interesting little thing there. You will see in this little villi, there are some blood vessels and some lymphatics. And that is as the nutrients penetrate through this gut barrier, it is absorbed into your bloodstream and into your lymphatics and eventually reaches your system. First goes through your liver, and then it reaches your system, and then your body can use it. So that is basically how it works. So just back to here, I just wanted to mention that all the blood coming from your gut goes up to your liver. I don't have a pointer, so I hope you all know where the liver is. Okay, so it goes to your liver. Your liver is full of Kupfer cells. Those are specialized immune cells. It plays a very important role in immune modulation in your body. So that is also one of the reasons why our guts are so importantly linked with our immune systems. And anything that drains into your lymphatics, so those are your fats and your fat-soluble products, they go through a series of lymph glands before they are eventually dumped back into your bloodstream. And as you know, your lymph glands is an essential part of your immune system. So, and right through your gut, there are immune cells strategically placed throughout all the layers, throughout your whole gut, including your colon, because your immune system is so important. 90% of your immune cells is related to the gut, and the rest is in the rest of your body. And the gut actually trains and regulates your immune system through a very intricate series of chemicals, chemical messengers that your gut releases, and then gives messages to your immune system. So when that goes wrong, you can get things again, like we've said, all these inflammatory conditions and autoimmunity and food allergies, all related to our immune system. Even poor surveillance of our bodies for cancer cells can be a result of a dysfunctional immune system. And then also that regular infections, if your immune system is depleted and not responding as it should to infections, you can also have that situation where you get sick often and you take very long to recover. So that's why it's so important that if you look after your gut feeds into your immune system. And if your immune system is well moderated, it controls the inflammatory responses in your body. Does it make sense so far? Okay. So it will, then from your small intestine, you go into your colon. And we previously thought, your colon is only there to contain your poop. It is there to absorb water so that your poop is not watery, and that's the end of it. But now we know that it's so much more. It has a major role in your immune modulation. It basically is a fermentation chamber for your undigested food particles that goes through. There is a lot of food particles that's not absorbed in your small intestine for good reason, because you have a microbiome who needs to work on that, and we're going to spend quite a bit of time on that. And from there, then, these particles is absorbed, these products of the microbiome is absorbed. And yes, your colon is the host of your best friends, which is your microbiome. So it will be incomplete if we don't talk about poop. So we don't aim for number 2, we aim for number 4. That is what we really want our poop to look like. Okay, so it is normal to have slight variations throughout periods of time, but we really want to stay between 3 and 5 and aim for 4. Okay, so what is normal? Normal is that there is a gastrocolic reflex. When you eat, you should within a few minutes, you should have the urge to relieve yourself. And anybody who's raised a small baby will know. They eat, then they poop. But what do? We don't go when we need to go. And eventually your body learns, there's no point sending the signals because I'm anyway going to be ignored. And that is how we get into bad habits. Our bodies stop recognizing the signals that we actually need to go. And we develop constipation and we sit with big problems. Okay, so it's normal to go to the loo at least once a day. And if you have a very healthy gut, you may go after each meal. And that is actually the ideal, but at least once a day. Your stool should be large and bulky, and it should be easy and quick and effortless and painless. And you shouldn't need a ton of toilet paper to clean. If you do, you need more soluble fiber to kind of bind it together, right? It should not smell terrible. If it does, it's because there are products being formed in your gut that shouldn't be there. And it should leave you feeling good. It should be a good feeling when you walk out of there and say, whew, that was good. Okay, that's how it should be. Here is a fun fact. 60% of your stool is not made up of food waste, but actually of bacteria and microorganisms that has died off and is now being excreted from your body. 60%. So the healthier and more diverse your gut microbiome is, the bigger and bulkier your poos are going to be. And that's great. That's good news. Okay. So your gut motility is very important. We want things to move through within 24 hours at the latest. If you want to test your gut motility, beetroot, a nice big plate of beetroot, and keep an eye and see when it comes through. Okay. So here we are to the microbiome, and we're going to spend a bulk of our time here because this is really, really important. Okay, so our human body has got 30 trillion cells, but our gut microbiome has 38 trillion cells. It beats us, if it's healthy, of course. Okay, so, and 90% of your microbiome resides in your gut. It will weigh around 1.5 kgs on average. That's quite a lot, I think, of bacteria and viruses and things that lives there because they're tiny, tiny, tiny. And the rest of your microbiome lives in places like your ears and your nose and your skin and in your vagina. And it's there to keep all those areas healthy. Okay, so, but where does it come from? So before birth, it's generally accepted that the gut is sterile. It's becoming a little bit more controversial now, where the gut is actually indeed sterile, but at this point, that still seems to be the consensus. But during pregnancy, the mom's gut microbiome is already modulating the baby's immune system. There's such a tight connection. Then during the birth process, as the baby moves through the birth canal, the baby is exposed to very friendly bacteria. And we know in the 3rd trimester, the birth canal's microbiome actually changes to lactobacillus predominant. And that is kind of the first bacteria you want to populate the baby because they are also the nurses of the microbiome. They are very good to other bacteria that come in and they nurse them and help them to grow. And then as the baby actually comes out of the birth canal, it's also exposed to fecal bacteria because it's so close to the anus. And that is how the baby gets mom's microbiome. So that's so important why mom needs to have a healthy microbiome. And it's actually been shown that people who don't live healthily, that over generations, the gut microbiome actually becomes poorer and poorer in its diversity. So pregnant mommies, look after your guts. Once the baby is born, the baby starts breastfeeding, And in breast milk, there's oligosaccharides, which is the perfect food for gut bacteria. And they start populating and growing and become more and more. And as baby gets older and is exposed to the environment, some of the environmental bacteria will start populating baby. And when baby starts eating, baby will get the microbiome of the food that you eat. So if you take a single apple, that apple has a microbiome of its own, with all the good bacteria and necessary bacteria to actually facilitate the digestion of whatever is in that apple or whatever fruit you take. So that is why eating raw as a great part of our meals are so important, because we actually get microbiomes from our food. It augments the microbiome of your body. And so baby's microbiome grows. And it's very interesting that if you take a stool sample and isolate the microbiome of a baby at the age of 3 months, you can accurately predict whether this child will develop asthma before the age of 5, depending on how diverse that baby's microbiome is. So, but what do? We give cesarean sections without active labor. So we cut the birth canal out. We don't breastfeed, or we breastfeed very short periods of time. We cut that off. And because baby doesn't get all the immunity from the breast milk, we put baby on a few courses of antibiotics. And what do? We create a recipe for disaster, for lifelong metabolic, gut health, and inflammatory diseases that's gonna beset that child. We actually know that babies who's been born through cesarean section without active labor have a higher incidence of asthma and allergic diseases, of celiac disease, of type 1 diabetes, of obesity, of inflammatory bowel disease, and of ADHD and autism, about a 10 to 30% relative risk increase. That's significant. It's worrying, isn't it? So God has made things the way it should be. Let's try and stick to the way things should happen. Okay. So back to our microbiome. So it consists not only of bacteria, but also viruses and some fungi and some archaea, which are very simple organisms that live all together. And it forms a whole ecosystem in there. And in that ecosystem, they support each other. But some of them will say, you're my friend, I'll help you grow. But there's also competition between them. And that's a good thing, because we want our friendly bacteria to compete with the unfriendly bacteria and keep them in check, because not all gut bacteria are necessarily to our advantage. They've got quite a short lifespan, most of them just hours to days, and there are a few who will live a little bit longer. But the good news is that you can control what happens with your gut bacteria, because what you feed grows. So we're going to talk quite a bit about what we need to feed our gut bacteria. And here comes the spoiler alert. The friendly gut bacteria wants to live on fiber and complex carbohydrates. That's what they love. So it's coming in a bit more detail. So this is really a beautiful interplay that happens between your choices of food and between this microbiome that lives in your gut. And this shows you that this creation is just perfectly made. If it was me, I would never have thought to put a few bugs in your tummy. But they play such an important part in our health. One of the things, and one of the most important things that we're going to focus on quite a bit now, is that they make this, short-chain fatty acids. Okay, now it sounds complicated, but really is not. So when your gut bacteria finds fiber, especially your soluble fiber and resistant starch, many of them produce these compounds in your colon. Okay, there are 3 of them known. Propionate is well known to regulate your glucose levels, your glucose signaling, and it is directly linked with your insulin levels, etc. Okay, so that is why we know that if your gut microbiome is disturbed, your risk for type 2 diabetes is higher. Okay, Then a very interesting fact about this blood sugar regulation is that there was a study done where they actually fed 2 groups of people a slice of white bread. Now we know white bread is going to spike your sugar, right? On the one group, they added additional fiber in. Then they checked their blood sugar levels. And obviously they found that the one with the extra fiber had a lower sugar spike. Then 5 hours later, they took the same 2 groups and they gave them each only a slice of white bread and to see what their sugar levels did. And that was an interesting thing. They call it the second meal effect, is that the group who had the fiber earlier, even with a second meal, their blood sugar was still lower. And that is because of the short-chain fatty acids that was produced because of that fiber, and it actually controls your blood sugar. Then there's acetate, is another one of the short-chain fatty acids. It plays an important role in appetite regulation and signaling to the brain that you're actually full. It also, microbial cross-feeding, they like to feed, some of the bacteria actually like to feed on that. And because it lowers the pH, it helps with the overgrowth of bad bacteria so that that doesn't happen. And here is the star of the show. This is butyrate. Very, very well studied compounds in our bodies. Only produced by your microbiome. Your body can't make butyrate on its own. So what does butyrate do? It's a very, very strong anti-inflammatory, the strongest anti-inflammatory compound in your body, and it is comparable to, for instance, ibuprofen that you would take. Same strength, right? But you make it locally in your gut if you take enough fiber and complex carbohydrates. Now, this butyrate works through inhibiting tumor necrosis factor, through nuclear factor kappa B and interferon gamma, which is your strongest signaling chemicals that activates inflammation in your body. So we even know how they work. And so what is interesting is it doesn't only work locally in your gut, but it actually gets absorbed. And it circulates throughout your body, and it basically quenches the fires of inflammation right through your body, including your brain. It can cross your blood-brain barrier and even help with inflammation in your brain. And if that was all that butyrate did, I would say it's good enough for me. But it does so many more things. The other important thing is that it actually provides the energy needs for your colonic cells, that lining, of about 70% of its energy needs is supplied by butyrate. And it plays an extremely important role in maintaining the tight junctions by regulating the protein synthesis of those specific proteins to keep that gut permeability intact. Then it also plays an important part in your gut motility. So it can relieve your constipation. And also many people with IBS actually suffer with hypersensitivity of the nerves in their guts. And this can actually quiet those nerves down and reduce that hypersensitivity. It also plays a very important role in your immune system. It moderates your T cells, your regulatory T cells, so that it will reduce the risk of developing autoimmune diseases and allergies. And then it inhibits HDAC, which is an enzyme that is important for cell proliferation in cancer cells. So it can slow down that cancer proliferation in the cells. Also, lowers cholesterol by working on a specific enzyme that is in the liver that actually works in the conversion of forming cholesterol in your body. So that's amazing, isn't it? So in a summary, if you've got enough butyrate, you are sorting out your gut lining, and you are sorting out inflammation in your body. Quite big, ne? What must we feed the microbes for them to be able to make this? Fiber and complex carbohydrates. Very good. Okay. It's also important for appetite regulation. Who would have thought? You know GLP-1, the big Ozempic thing? Yeah. Well, actually, these short-chain fatty acids and some of the modified bile acids, when your gut works on your bile acids, actually stimulate GLP-1 release in your body. It also increases your sensitivity for leptin, which is your full hormone, so that you can feel full when you're supposed to feel full. And it also decreased the release of ghrelin, which is your hunger hormone. Okay, so and in mice, when they took did a study in mice, and they took the microbiome of obese people and put it into a normal mouse, and they took the microbiome of somebody who's not obese and put it into a normal mouse. The thin mouse where the thin person's microbiome stayed thin, but the mouse who got the fat person or the obese person's microbiome became fat. Very interesting, isn't it? And they fed them the same genetic component, lineage of the mice, same caloric intake, but the change in the microbiome actually led to obesity. Okay, so hormonal balance. Just want to quickly run through this. So estrogen in our bodies are actually being recycled. It's produced in the ovaries, goes into the bloodstream, goes through the liver where it's partially deactivated. From the liver through the bile, it goes into your gut. And there your gut microbiome is a bit of a gatekeeper because it actually has the ability to reactivate that estrogen, or to choose not to activate that estrogen. So it's a gatekeeper of your hormonal balance. And especially if we think of all the xenoestrogens that we get in nowadays from plastics and cosmetics and fragrances, those extra estrogen intake wreaks havoc in our bodies, but your gut microbiome is the gatekeeper that can actually keep that under control. And then even for testosterone in our men, low testosterone in men has increased tremendously. It's so common nowadays, and we wonder why. And it can be that if you have a permeable gut, so if you've got leaks, some of the endotoxin, so that is the broken parts of the bacteria, can actually leak through, and it can cause inflammation in the testes and reduce testosterone production. So let's look after our gut barriers. Okay, now here we're talking about toxins. So our gut microbiome can actually absorb toxins, grab onto it so that it doesn't get absorbed. They then hold onto those toxins, die off, and the toxins is excreted. So there is a whole list of things that I wanted to share with you, but for time's sake, I'm not going to go through all of that. But that is the long and the short of it. But we have to remember that things are always a two-way street. And just as they help us by grabbing onto toxins, there are also certain toxins that we can ingest that they find toxic. One of them we've already mentioned, alcohol. Microplastics and nanoplastics is a big thing. So the big thing with plastics is don't heat anything in plastic. Don't let any plastic get warm, and think of tea bags. Most of our tea bags actually contain plastic. Herbicides and pesticides is a big one, like the whole glyphosate thing. But here's the interesting thing, is that most of the pesticide load that we get in is actually not from plants that's been sprayed, but is from meat, fish, and dairy products, because it bioaccumulates in the animals that actually eat it. And as they grow, it stays in them. And by the time that you eat that piece of meat or that fish, there is a lot of toxins together already in there. So you get massive loads through animal products, unfortunately. If you do make the effort to wash your legumes, your grains, your fruits, vegetables properly, soak them a little while, especially if bicarb is added, and then rinse them well afterwards, you can reduce your pesticide load by 80 to 90%. Because most of them is surface then. Okay, then I wanted to mention artificial sweeteners. They are a pest for your gut microbiome. And I want to point one specifically out, and that is trehalose. It's not something that we hear often about, and I've actually only just really started reading about it when I was preparing for this talk. Very cheap, and it's great because it keeps things moist and gives beautiful shelf stability. So they add it into desserts, frozen desserts, your ice creams, baked goods, and it is absolutely toxic for our gut. And for those of you who know about Clostridium difficile, we've been wondering, why is there such an overgrowth of Clostridium difficile? And it's now been directly linked in animal studies to trehalose usage. But because we don't have human studies in it yet, it's still everywhere. And they just go like, oh, it's not proven in humans. So watch out. It will most likely on your ingredient label not say trehalose. It may just say a disaccharide, which can literally mean almost anything, any sugar that is just two linked together. Or they may use, what is it, C something. Let me just quickly see. I've written it down here somewhere, and I can't find it now. I'll tell you later when I see it. Okay, so I wanted to tell you what it is. E965. That is what it may be called. So watch out for trehalose. Then,
may I ask you to spell that for me, please?
TREHALOSE. Then antibiotics. Okay, we all know that antibiotics are sometimes necessary. However, your gut bacteria do not appreciate it. And here are just two facts. Cipro, which is so commonly used, ciprofloxacin, if you give somebody a 5-day course, a third of the gut bacteria is gone. 6 months later, most of it will have been recovered. 4 weeks later, sorry, most of them will have been recovered, but by 6 months, you can still see in the gut microbiome that person had ciprofloxacin. It will never fully recover. Then our macrolides, like the classids and flagyl group, if you give a full course of that 4 years later, so you can regard it as permanent eradication of some of the species of your gut microbiome. It will never, ever recover. We've mentioned the anti-inflammatories, that plays a role. It alters your gut bacteria and your tight junctions. And then even PPIs, you know, the antacids that we pop so easily, even that is shown to alter your gut bacteria and actually increases your risk for SIBO, which is an overgrowth of bacteria in your small intestine. And also it alters your immunity. So it's known that people on PPIs has a higher risk for respiratory infections. Right, so just to mention that there are also toxins produced by bad gut bacteria in your body. I've got a list here with the names of these bacteria if anybody is interested to know. But these gut bacteria are, their growth is promoted by animal protein, unfortunately. And they can produce things like amines, which cause food sensitivities, hydrogen sulfate, which is linked to ulcerative colitis, secondary bile salts, strongly linked with any of your GIT cancers, your gastrointestinal tract cancers. And then there's a compound TMAO, which is formed by your gut bacteria, which is undeniably linked with heart disease, stroke, Alzheimer's, peripheral vascular disease, chronic kidney disease. And that is all bacteria that should not be dominant, but because they thrive on animal products, they tend to grow. Now, here's an interesting study that was done. They've taken a group of vegetarians and a group of regular meat eaters, and they gave them each a piece of steak, exactly the same size, mass, whatever, and they measured their TMAO production in their colons. And this is very interesting that the vegetarian group did not produce any TMAO because they don't have the bacteria to produce it. So for those who are then occasional meat eaters, this is good news, because that means that if you generally don't feed that bacteria, if you every now and again choose to have a piece of meat or an animal product or whatever, you are much less likely to produce this very toxic compound. I know, it's hectic, eh? Yeah. Okay, so I want to, I'm not very far from the end of this part of the presentation. So whole foods come in uniquely packaged and perfectly balanced nutritional gift packs. So the combinations of the phytonutrients, which simply means the plant compounds in food, whole foods, complement and enhance each other's workings and absorption, and it works much better than what you would actually take individual supplements. We know that for definite. But what is interesting is that your microbiome actually further enhance the nutritional value of many of the nutritional compounds that we take in by activating it or improving its absorption or changing it to a more active, metabolically active compound. And I'm going to give you the example of turmeric. Turmeric, as we know, is very good. It's very good for us. It's a very good anti-inflammatory compound. We also know that it's got very poor absorption. Only about 1% of whole turmeric, the curcumin, which is the active compound in there, only 1% will be absorbed. You can increase it by adding pepperine. That will increase it to about 20%. But if you have a healthy gut microbiome and your microbiome gets hold of the turmeric, it actually changes it to other active compounds called tetrahydrocurcumin, dihydrocurcumin, and ferulic acids derivatives. They are much better absorbed than the curcumin, even with pepperine, and they have even stronger anti-inflammatory effects than the actual curcumin, and they also have stronger antioxidant effects than the curcumin. How amazing is that? Are you amazed?
Yes.
Yes, because I am. Okay, so let's just move on. Okay, so now we all know about the gut-brain axis, right? That's a big thing. What is interesting is that your gut actually has its own nervous system. The enteric nervous system is part of your autonomic nervous system, meaning that it functions on its own. It doesn't actually need a brain bypass. It is extremely complex with a lot of interconnections, also interconnected with your immune system and your metabolism and with your nervous system. It contains sensory nerves in there that senses what is happening in your gut, not only the motility and the stretch of it, but also actually picking up what nutrients and chemicals or whatever is in your gut. It sends it through interneurons, which does the interpretation of that data, and then it sends it on to other parts of your body's nervous system. And it even then feed back with the motor neurons that will then talk to your gut motility. How quickly must your gut move? That is why we, for instance, know if you have, for instance, food poisoning and you've got those compounds in there, it's like this, and your gut knows, okay, I need to get this out. This all happens with your enteric nervous system. Okay, so even control the secretion of the enzymes through the glands that sits in your gut. It is really amazing. But then we also know about the vagus nerve. That is your longest uninterrupted nerve that runs between your brain and your gut. And in your vagus nerve, there are more nerve cells than actually in your spinal cord. So it's a very, very important nerve. And it directly communicates between your gut and your brain. And the vagus nerve is actually there for a rest and digest purpose. It is actually a calming nerve. So, but obviously if it's overstimulated and things go wrong, then it can actually cut out, and then you have the opposite happening. So we know that our brain works with neurotransmitters, right? We know of all these brain chemicals. We hear of things like serotonin and dopamine and GABA and all these many neurotransmitters. Well, 90% of your serotonin in your body is produced by your gut. Now, it doesn't cross over your blood-brain barrier, but in the process of making it, there are precursors that's formed, and those precursors can cross over your gut-brain barrier. So if your gut is healthy and making lots of serotonin, which is made by the microbacteria, your microbiome, by the way, then you can actually enhance in a way that by giving the precursors to your brain cells, your serotonin production in your brain. Similarly with dopamine, 50% of the dopamine is actually made in our gut. And there are many, many other neurotransmitters. Actually, I have put down here somewhere how many. I've forgotten now and I can't find the notes. but many, many different types of neurotransmitters are produced in our guts. And we know also, I've mentioned to you the short chain fatty acids that can cross your blood-brain barrier, the star of the gut. Okay, it can reduce the inflammation in your brain. You know, that brain fog that we sometimes complain of can improve memory and learning. It interferes with amyloid formation and Alzheimer's. It reduces Parkinson's risk. And with children on a high fiber diet actually has better cognitive control because of these short chain fatty acids, and it manifests itself in better ability to task shift, better working memory, and better focus. Okay, so there is a definite connection between our guts and our brain. And gut dysbiosis is directly associated with Alzheimer's. Parkinson's, many years before Parkinson's starts, they will start with constipation. Go ask any Parkinson patient. Migraines are linked with gut dysbiosis, chronic fatigue, autism, ADHD, as I mentioned, and then depression and anxiety. Also with mouse models, if they've implanted the microbiome of a person who struggles with those mood disorders, the mice actually developed either anxiety or depression. So there's a very, very strong link. And then we know with irritable bowel syndrome, there's a very strong overlap between mood disorders and IBS. So, and it really comes down to that visceral hypersensitivity because of the neurotransmitters that is not proper. Okay, so we have now spoken a lot about the background, and now we're going to dive more into the actual lifestyle factors that we need to address. And those of you who attended our cancer sessions will know this acronym, New Start. And I'm using this again because it's such a beautiful checklist to have, to check, am I doing everything right today? And as we said, everything is connected. What is good for your gut is good for your heart, is good for your brain, so we can stick with New Start throughout. Okay, so New Start basically stands for nutrition, exercise, water, sunlight, temperance, air, rest, and trust in God. And that this is an acronym that came from Weimar Institute in the US, who is very, very well known for their lifestyle interventions. And they have had great success in reversing type 2 diabetes and reversing drug-resistant depression by lifestyle interventions. So we thank Weimar for the acronym that we are borrowing from them. Okay, so we're going to start with nutrition. This cannot be comprehensive because there's not enough time. But I'm going to touch on fiber and resistant starch. We're going to talk a little bit about protein, about fats, and then about polyphenols. Once we have all our recordings of the cancer talks out, I would encourage you to have a look at them because I go much deeper into nutrition in those talks, and the same principles apply. Okay, so fiber, as we now know, is essential for our gut microbiome. If you feed your gut microbiome fiber, it's going to thrive. Okay, so what contains fiber? Plants. That's the answer. Okay, how much fiber is in animals' products? Zero. Nothing. Okay, so if you want a healthy gut, focus on plants. And the saying is, eat more plants. That is what you should be doing, right? So how much fiber should we be getting? About 30 grams per day. Now I'm like, okay, how much is 30 grams? I'm not even going to try and tell you that, but you just need much more. The fact is, though, that 97%, yeah, I'm Afrikaans, so I almost swapped it around. 97% of the population get much less than that. In fact, the average American male gets about 18 grams of fiber a day. That's about half. And the average American female, about 15 grams. And we know that we follow the American statistics. What they do, we do. So you probably need double the fiber that you get in every day. Okay, now there are two types of fiber. We get insoluble fiber and soluble fiber. The insoluble fiber is bran, the type of things that we see in bran. You know, like when you make a bran muffin and it goes right through, comes out this unchanged the other side. It's good for our gut. It's not bad. It's important to bulk up your stools. It regulates absorption speed, etc. So it is a good thing. But I'm going to focus on the soluble fiber, which is the important food for our gut microbiome so it can produce short-chain fatty acids. Okay. And how do you know if something has soluble fiber in? It has a little bit of a jelliness to it. So you know when you make oats and it cools down and becomes a blob, that is the soluble fiber that makes that blobbiness. So if we think of other things that's got lots of soluble fiber in, you know, chia seeds, you can make a chia pudding. That is because of the soluble fiber in there. Basil seeds. Flax, thank you. I was looking for the word. Flaxseed, similar. But just remember, we want actually our flaxseed and maybe even our chia ground so that we can release the omega-3s in there. Otherwise, it sits inside its little shell and we don't actually get the rest of the goodness from it. And then also beans, your legumes, your whole legume family is very high in soluble fiber. And then most of your fruits and vegetables has got some soluble fiber in there. So you don't have to stress too much, just eat more plants. That's how it should go. Okay, so now if you want to introduce more fiber into your diet, how should you do this? Well, this is the thing. You should start low and you should go slow. Because if you don't have the correct microbiome, the organisms that are in there won't know what to do with all this fiber and you're going to bloat. You're going to feel really not so lekker. So the idea is to start slowly and build it up slowly, slowly, slowly over time. And just to remember, there will be a transition period. It's going to be a period where you're going to feel more bloated than usual. That little bit of extra bloatedness should be tolerated and not just go, oh, this doesn't work for me, I'm just going to leave it. It should not cause severe discomfort, but you may be aware of it. But that is the process of transition, that you're giving your microbiome time to grow and expand its capabilities to be able to work on this extra fiber. So really, start slowly, preferably from food. But there are some circumstances where one may say, okay, you need a bit of a fiber supplement. And the one that's most widely available is psyllium husk. Many of you may know. But even if you're going to use psyllium husk, start slow, very low and slow, no more than a teaspoon. And the best way to ingest psyllium husk is to take a little bit of water, put it in there, stir it, and slick it quickly before it gels up and becomes this jelly business that you need to try and get down. And then you drink a good glass of water afterwards because it absorbs water. You don't want it to become this kind of blockage in your gut. So, but I really do suggest rather that you get your fiber from whole foods, because then it's not just fiber, but all the other good nutrients that comes with it. Dirk, you had a question.
The fiber gel orange, is that?
That is psyllium. Okay. That's psyllium husk. You also get like acacia fiber, which does a similar thing. There is a guar gum fiber that does a similar thing. There's a whole list that's very similar. They're not so easy to find. In South Africa, we mostly find the psyllium husk. Okay, so that is your soluble fibers. Okay, we're happy with where we find them, right? Plants, but especially in your grains like oats, barley, that becomes a bit jelly. In your seeds like your chia and your flax, thank you. And then in generally in fruits and vegetables, you'll find them, and then your legumes. Don't forget your legumes. Okay, so let's talk about resistant starch. So resistant starch is found in legumes and in grains, and then generally in food and vegetables. But generally, especially your legumes and your grains are high in resistant starch. Let's start with grains. Many people have this concept that grains are bad and that they're inflammatory and we should avoid carbohydrates by all means, okay? That is false. We know, for instance, that there's a study that showed that people who are, there was two groups. The one group was given whole grain foods. The other one was, they eliminated all grains from their diet. They had similar profiles. The ones who had the whole grains added decreased their CRP, which is the inflammatory marker, by 21% within 4 weeks. That's a lot. The ones who eliminated whole grains increased their CRP by 12%. So it is not true that grains are pro-inflammatory. On the contrary. Our problem with grains lies that we process them. And once they are processed, it becomes a whole different ball game, because then suddenly the starch and the sugary bits in there is absorbed in our small intestine, and it should be, some of it will be absorbed because we need also a good level of glucose, but the resistant starch is actually exposed and ground up, so it's absorbed too quickly and it doesn't go through to your colon, where your microbiomes actually need it to function from. So a diet high in sugar and in refined carbohydrates is pro-inflammatory and actually results in a loss of diversity of your gut microbiome. So we need to ask, what about gluten? I knew that question will come up. Okay, now I'm just going to give the spoiler. Gluten is not your enemy in most cases. 1% of people actually has celiac disease. And celiac disease, gluten is non-negotiable. You cannot have it because there are actual antibodies that attacks it, and it results in a terrible cascade of inflammation in your body. If you have celiac, don't even try. But most other people who think they're gluten intolerant or gluten sensitive, it actually happens because their gut microbiome is disturbed and their gut integrity is disturbed. And then if some of that gluten leaks through, or some of the other products that comes with gluten, I'll talk about a bit about that now, leaks through the gut barrier, it triggers inflammation, and they think it's actually the gluten. And they feel better when they eliminate gluten, but it's because they actually have used refined grains, and anybody's going to feel better if you cut out your refined grains. But then while it's cut out, they anyway lose their microbiome, who's supposed to be working on carbohydrates, and then when they put it back, they're like, oh, I bloat, I can't take gluten. But it's because they have actually destroyed their microbiome by not taking grains. So it's a very, very difficult balance to find. And we're going to talk a little bit later about how we can actually deal with food sensitivities and these kind of issues. Okay. So there was a study that showed that after 1 month of being gluten-free, people's microbiome declined significantly. And I've got a list here of all the good bacteria that just disappeared off their gut. And we also show that they actually have a significant loss of enzymes that is produced by your microbiome if you go gluten-free. I want to just mention here the FODMAP group. Those of you who have gut issues may be aware of FODMAPs because you may have found it in reading, and I'm not going to dive into it a lot, but what it basically is, it's a group of foods that has type of starches that is difficult to digest if you don't have the right enzymes. And it stands for fermentation of disaccharides, monosaccharides, and polyols. And so it's a big word, it's just to impress you, to show you I know what I'm talking about. But there are actually lists of high and low FODMAP diets available. And many people think they're gluten sensitive, but in the meantime, it's actually some of the other FODMAPs that's causing difficulty. And the way to deal with this would be to go for a period of time on a low FODMAP diet. I'm talking about a week, not long. And in that time, take all the good fiber and all the good things that you possibly can to try and restore your gut lining as much as possible, and then slowly start reintroducing your FODMAPs. Small little bits at a time, one at a time so that you can keep track of what this is doing to me. And if you do it a little bit at a time, it also gives your microbiome time to adjust. And the idea is that you don't forever cut it out, because everything that you cut out, you're paying a price for, because there are nutrients that you're missing out on, and that your microbiome is desperate to have and that your body really needs. Okay, so also just something interesting about gluten is that sourdough bread is lower in gluten than normal bread. So that is an option for those bread lovers over here. The ideal, of course, would be to actually be able to make a whole grain sour bread, because sourdough bread, most of us get the white sourdough, and it's very difficult to make a nice whole grain sourdough because it's hard and thick, and so they usually do like a 40-60 or 50-50, but it's better. I'm still going to learn it, okay? When I'm grown up, I'm going to learn to do sourdough bread. Okay, then I want to talk about legumes. That's the next one. Now, there is a myriad of studies that shows how good legumes are for us. It is so good, and I'm not going to go through all the studies. I've pointed some of it out in our cancer talks, but it's really good for us. If you consume legumes, there are studies that shows it has up to a 40% reduction in your CRP, your inflammatory marker. And in that same study, people who took the legumes actually had weight loss despite the same number of calories than the other group. So it's really good for us, with massive evidence for massive health benefits. Okay. And since we're talking about legumes, I'm moving into proteins because we know that our legumes contain protein. So legume is very interesting. It's the perfect combination of protein plus resistant starch plus fiber. So it's really, really good for us. But nowadays, we have an obsession with protein. And the first question somebody will ask me when they hear that I eat plant-centered, they will go, oh, but where do you get your protein? But it's interesting that 97% of us actually gets more protein than we need. And it's also interesting that it's the same 97% of people who don't get enough fiber. So I think we need to maybe shift our focus slightly from being so obsessed about protein and start focusing more on fiber. Not that I'm saying that protein is not important. We do need protein, but we need adequate protein, not excess protein. Once again, I invite you to go look at our previous talks, because there I talked about high protein intake and what the evidence shows about high protein versus a normal protein intake of about 0.6 to 0.9 grams per kilo per day. Okay, so animal protein, on the other hand, shows consistently in many studies inflammation and a leaky gut. So if you enjoy your animal protein, maybe you should just consider reducing your amount slightly and bringing in legumes. I'm not saying go and cut everything out necessarily. It's your choice. That's a choice that we have made. But this is more about adding in. And we know with food, there's always an opportunity cost. Now, you know, if you're in business, you know about opportunity costs. If I spend my money here, I must know that I can't spend it there, so there's opportunity loss. Same with food. If we eat this, we must know we lose an opportunity with something else. So we always have to ask, what am I losing out if I eat this instead of this? Okay, so there's a comparison thing with food and its nutritional value. Okay, so I'm going to go over just to plant proteins. Can you get sufficient protein with plants only? Yes, you can, and it's actually not that hard, because even your grains contain protein. So especially if you combine grains, whole grains, and legumes, you get all the essential amino acids in that, and it doesn't even have to be in the same meal. But if you have in a day some portions of whole grain and some portions of legumes, you're going to get all your protein that you need. Okay, so plant protein has been shown to, especially legumes, to increase the growth of your anti-inflammatory gut species and to decrease the growth of some of your destructive and bad gut species. We've spoken about, people always ask, but what about the pesticides? We have mentioned it. Just soak and rinse, okay? That can be done. What about tins? People are going to go, oh, what about tin beans? Is it terrible for you? No, it's not terrible. It is not. It is probably better to cook your beans from scratch. But the reality is that life happens. So I always have backup tins of beans because some days there is just, it's not going to happen. So I rather have the tin. I just always rinse it off so I get the excess salt off there. Okay, so, but what about the bloating? That is now the question that everybody has about their legumes. Okay, so we actually have very few enzymes in our bodies that can digest carbohydrates. That basically is the amylase variants, the maltase variants, and that's it. That's what we have. And then lactase, that's in milk, but it's the only good thing in milk actually is the sugar in there. But anyway, we'll get to that later. Okay, so, and those are focused on simple carbohydrates. So we in ourselves don't really have the ability to digest complex carbohydrates, but our microbiome does. And there are thousands of what they call Cas enzymes that our microbiomes secrete that can digest legumes and the complex carbohydrates in both legumes and starches. And the interesting thing is that they are induced over time. So here again, start low and go slow and do it frequently so that your microbiome can adjust over time. What also helps is if you soak and rinse properly before you cook it. Pressure cooking seems to reduce it. Freezing after cooking and then warming up seems to reduce your gas formation. And then lentils and chickpeas are the most easily digested. So those are the low FODMAPs actually of your, since we've mentioned it, of your legumes. So if you are new to legumes, I would suggest that you start with lentils and chickpeas and just a tiny bit at a time, even 3 times a day, and slowly build it up and then start over time introducing all the myriad of other very interesting tasty beans and lentils that there are. See it as a new adventure and start learning to cook with the legumes. It is really amazing. We even add legumes into salads, and some we eat hot, some we eat cold. It is just so diverse. And there's another interesting thing about legumes. If you sprout them, they actually further increase their protein content. So as that moment, as that little plant's ready to grow, and it's just sprouted, the protein content is significantly higher. So, and also interestingly, it makes an enzyme DOA, which actually breaks down histamine in your gut. So for people who are histamine sensitive, those who easily break out in hives and they wonder what happened, what did I eat, add some sprouts. They're actually really good with controlling that. So what about your fad diets? There are studies that have shown that with a Paleolithic diet, which is a no-grain diet, there's actually an overgrowth of Hungetella. That's one of the species that produces TMAO. It's proven. Okay. So we need to be careful with categorical eliminations of foods because we are doing damage. And then there's a study being done by Lawrence David and Peter Thunbach, very elegant designed, where they looked at the keto carnivore group and they cycled people between plant-based diets and then put them on a keto only animal-based diet. And what they found is that within 24 hours, there's already a change in their microbiome leaning towards the pro-inflammatory bacteria. And which was very worrying is there was an overgrowth of Biphila, I'm going to say it properly, Bilophila wadsworthia. Okay, that is one of the species that produces hydrogen sulfide. And hydrogen sulfide is directly linked with inflammatory bowel disease and colon cancer. So, I'm just saying. So, here again, I just want to invite you to consider at least doing some replacement. Add in all the good stuff, and make your decisions as you go on. All right, that was protein. What about fats and oils? Okay, so there was a human study done, published in the journal Gut in 2019 that looked at high-fat diets with over 3 cohorts with consistent fiber intake throughout all 3. One got 20% of their calories as a oil, and it was actually plant oils, interesting. One is 30% and one is 40%. And as the oil percentage increased, the pro-inflammatory microbiome shift happened, and they decreased their short-chain fatty acid production. So, but it's not just because it is oils that they use. This happens regardless of the type of fat. And I want to quickly just dive into saturated fats, because we've got this whole thing of butter is back and butter is good. However, we know that every saturated fat, the predominant fatty acid in there is called, now it's out of my mind for a moment. It's going to come back now. Palmitic acid. It's called palmitic acid. And palmitic acid is bad for you. Palmitic acid is directly linked with cardiovascular disease. You will know this. It raises your bad cholesterol. It causes inflammation through a whole long list that I've got here of inflammatory markers. It causes insulin resistance by ceramide synthesis, which impairs your insulin signaling. It reduces your nitric oxide production, which controls your blood pressure, and it causes oxidative stress. It is not good for you. Okay, so let's also, I just want to mention that palm oil is very high in palmitic acid, so avoid palm oil. Coconut oil has some palmitic acid in, but it is not predominant. It more has lauric acid, and there's still some uncertainty, actually, about coconut oil and its real health benefits. We do know that it raises your LDL cholesterol, but it also raises your HDL cholesterol, which is your good one. So there's still very much uncertainty of what is actually significant. What we do know is that in countries that uses a lot of coconuts, like Thailand and those places, they actually have a very low incidence of heart disease. So we don't know what it's really doing. But then when we look at our plant oils, like our monounsaturated oils, which is our olive oils, and then our polyunsaturated, like our seed and nut oils, it really produces the growth of beneficial bacteria. It actually corrects dysbiosis, imbalance in your gut bacteria, and it reduces bacterial endotoxin release, which is toxic stuff into your blood. But I want to mention that when it comes to seed oils, it is highly processed. And it is much better to try and take it in its whole form. Eat your seeds. Have your seeds over your breakfast. If you have oats or whatever, sprinkle it on there, sprinkle it over your salads, bring it in other ways, because those are really, really good for you. They're not bad for you. In the end, it's all about the balance between your omega-3s and your omega-6s. Most of us, if we use processed foods, we have a high omega-6 intake because seed oils, processed seed oils are predominant in there. But what we want is we want them nicely in balance, and a 1:1 or to a 1:3 ratio between them, then they're not pro-inflammatory. Okay, so once again, just want to remind you, your omega-3s you get from your chia and your flax. Remember to grind them up. And if you feel you need a supplement, my choice of supplement for omega-3s is actually from algae production oil. They're actually now extracted from algae. Where do fish get their omega-3s from? From the algae that they eat. So they don't produce it themselves. Fish oil is still, it's a good source, but you run that risk of all the pesticides and all the bad stuff that accumulates in the ocean with your fish oils, unless you make sure you've got a very, very high quality. So I still prefer going for my my seeds, and then I supplement it with some algae oil, simply because the algae is already in the active forms, while your seeds needs to be converted. Okay, so that's fats. Here we go. Polyphenols, big word for color. That is all the good things that causes colors in foods. So when we say eat your rainbows, that is the polyphenols that we're talking about. This is bioactive compounds that are very strong antioxidants in your body. It does amazing things for us, and there's a list as long as my arm of them that has been studied in detail. We get them in spices, in our fruits and vegetables, in our berries, and even in our colored legumes and grains. So eat your rainbows. And here's a fun fact. We think when we take our polyphenols, we're going to absorb them in our small intestine and use them. Actually, 90% of them pass through to your colon, where your microbiome loves them because it promotes their growth. But the microbiome then takes these polyphenols and actually activate them and turn them into absorbable and active compounds that is then absorbed and then serves their purpose in your body. So we should look after our colons. It's an amazing place. Okay, I want to point out our aromatics, like our onions and garlics, really, really good for us. It's a good idea that if you chop them, to chop and stop. Wait a little while, 10 minutes, for some of those compounds to oxidize, because that actually activates it. And then I want to point out sulforaphane, which we get in our cruciferous vegetables. It is an amazing polyphenol. It is very, very active in helping our bodies to detox and a whole host of other very important things. Thank you, Ilya. So eat your broccoli and your cauliflower and your Brussels sprouts if you are really brave, and your kale and your cabbage. Your sulforaphane in there does amazing things for our bodies. To summarize what we need to eat more plants. That's really the basic message of what we are giving here. So we need to look at diversity. Just like we want a diversity in our microbiome, we want to, because they are diverse, we need to feed them diverse foods. Look at the diversity of plants. And there's some studies that has been done that showed that when people eat 30 or more different plants per week, they really have a huge advantage in their gut, in their health. 30. Okay, so it sounds like a massive amount, but fresh herbs and herbal teas also count. Your spices don't count. Your seeds that you sprinkle on count. And we actually counted the other day because I was wondering what we did. And we had, for breakfast, we had oats. I add some soya milk powder, very high quality, that's not too processed powder to my oats. It makes it nice and creamy, and I've got that little extra protein in there. And then we sprinkled it with our flaxseed. I also had a bit of chia pudding that I added to it. We also had our nut and seed and berry mix that we put on, and I chopped up some fruits that we just added on. So it was a nice pile. And with that, and then our lunch, which was a lentil stew that we had with a whole grain. And in that lentil stew, I had onion and garlic and carrot and celery and some baby marrow and some baby spinach that I stirred in right at the end. And then for the evening, we just had a nice mixed salad, and we ended up at 28 plants for the day. Sure. So it's not that hard. But it's all about variety. So it will be interesting for you to start counting how many plant species you get in. And if you want to really make work of this, is aim to next week, I want to just add 5 more in. And the week after that, just 5 more in, and see where you end up. Because there's actually 400 plant varieties on this planet, of which 300,000 are actually edible in some form, whether it is the root or the fruit or the leaves or whatever. But we actually only consume 200 plant species. So and only a few of those are actively farmed. So, and it's interesting that 60% of the world's calories come from rice, maize, and wheat. So we're really neglecting the rest of this rich diversity of plants. Right. I want to talk a little bit about prebiotics, probiotics, and postbiotics. Prebiotics we've actually spoken about a lot now, because all that a prebiotic is, it is food for your microbiome. Okay, and they are marketing it now. Oh, this is really good prebiotics, and here's inulin, and here is chicory roots, and take this. You can actually just eat enough soluble fiber. Don't waste your money on it. Get your soluble fiber and your resistant starches in, and you get plenty of prebiotics in. That's going to help your microbiome to grow. Okay, now what about probiotics? Now we all know, I still remember vividly as a medical student at Kalafong Hospital at the lecture hall sitting there, and he was the only English-speaking lecturer, so that's why I remember him clearly. In those days, they were all Afrikaans, and he was standing in front and he said, this Interflora that's on the market is a lot of rubbish. It will never take off because it's just started to become a thing. And here we sit today, and if you go look on the shelves, it is so many different probiotics. Okay, but here is a few things about probiotics. Firstly, the quality matters. Not all are equal. So if you're going to decide you want a probiotic, look at your colony-forming units in there. You want at least 10,000 colony-forming units in that is basically how many organisms are in there. And then many of them on the market are just single organisms. But the focus is changing a lot from just, I'll just pick one, any, mini, miny, mo, to actually targeted use of probiotics. It's still a very early field. There's still very little known about it. But for instance now, we know that if we have antibiotic-related diarrhea, Saccharomyces boulardii is the right one to give. That's the one that actually gives you results. If you have an acute diarrhea of another cause, Lactobacillus rhamnosus, that's the one to go for. We know now people who struggle with constipation may benefit from Bifidobacterium lactis. So we are starting to figure out which ones are most beneficial. And then for instance, people with IBS and bloating, Saccharomyces cerevisiae, which is simply brewer's yeast, is actually very beneficial. So the problem that we have, though, that you need to remember is that when you take a probiotic and it is not a delayed release capsule, most of them are killed off in your stomach. So very few of them actually go down. And they also mostly don't persist in your gut. They are usually only there for a short period of time. But it doesn't mean it's necessarily bad, because they often are there to support the rest of your microbiome. As we've said, there's a huge interrelational ecosystem going on in there. Some of them may persist, but overall, we are not really sure how beneficial just the routine use of a probiotic really is. And it is maybe something that you should try out. There are some probiotics on the market that is really high calorie forming units with a huge variety that has both bacteria and some fungi in there with some spores and whatever. That may be worth trying and seeing if it makes a difference for you. If you are going to use it, I would suggest that you use it for at least 30 days before you make a decision. And if it's not beneficial, don't continue. Don't waste your money. The most important thing is to rather enhance your own natural microbiome. And then what about postbiotics? Well, that is the good things that your microbiome produces. So we've already spoken about postbiotics, but I want to add in here, so the most important one is the short-chain fatty acids, butyrate. Okay, that is amazing. But then I want to just here talk about fermented foods. That has become such a big thing. And yes, fermented foods definitely is beneficial to our guts and to our health. They're not all equal though. And firstly, I just want to mention that probably the best thing about the fermented foods is the already fermented products that is in there rather than the actual microorganisms that's in there, because most of them are going to die off. They don't persist in our bodies. But what they have done already with the nutrition in the products is what actually makes a difference. So we do know, for instance, that people who take sauerkraut has a better microbiome. So there are many. There are things that sauerkraut, kimchi, miso, kombucha, sourdough, so it goes on. There are many of them. Sauerkraut is generally very good. Kombucha, I want to say we make kombucha because the kids love it. But just remember there is some sugar that remains in that kombucha. There is maybe a low level of alcohol if you're not careful at what time you take it out. It is quite acidic, so some people can find it irritating. So that is probably not something that I'm going to say you have to have kombucha. It's really good for you. But if you'd rather have a glass of kombucha instead of a fizzy drink, then I would say go for the kombucha rather than having a Coke, you know. So the other thing I wanted to talk about is what about kefir and Mars and yogurt? Yogurt that you buy, I want you to go look at the labels. It is actually shocking. I stood there the other day and I went through a whole lot of different makes of yogurt. And I was actually quite appalled. I found only one that didn't have additives in. I'm not just talking about the flavors and the colors and the sugars that they added, but I'm talking about preservatives that's actually in there, and thickeners and emulsifiers, all things that's really, really bad for us. So kefir, okay, this is my take on kefir. There are studies that show people who take kefir has lower inflammation in their guts. So it's not bad for you. But I am not a fan of dairy in general. And I will tell you why. Because you're not just getting the fermented product in there. You're also getting all that that is in that milk in already. Now, what is in milk? A lot of antibiotics. There's a lot of hormones, growth hormones, estrogen, because remember, a cow has to be pregnant or just post-pregnancy for it to make milk. So, and then we also know that when we did our cancer talks, when we looked at what is the biggest driver of IGF-1 release, which is a driver of cancer, it was dairy. So that is why I'm not going to say to you kefir is bad, but I'm just going to say to you kefir is better than what? Or what is better than kefir? Just keep that in mind. That is my choice. But if kefir works for you, you know, go for it. In the end, it is what works for your body. Similarly, with any of your, I wanted to mention that actually the same strains in yogurt, dairy yogurt, can actually also ferment plant milks. So there's a whole variety of plant yogurts, plant milk yogurts is now available. And I have been meaning to do it. For the last few weeks, I want to try some plant milk yogurt and see what I can do and how it's going to turn out, because they're quite expensive to buy. Like for instance, a coconut yogurt in Woolies is pretty expensive. So I want to actually try and play around with it. And I know some people who make plant-based yogurts with the same strains, and they say it's great. So that's just a little tidbit in there. If you can figure it out, please teach me. Okay, so, but then the interesting thing is if you are somebody who has got histamine sensitivity, you suffer with migraines, or you should not have high salt intake. Like for instance, if you have hypertension or kidney disease, you should be very careful with your salt intake, with your fermentation intake. For instance, the sauerkrauts, etc. They're very high in salt, some of them. Okay, we are actually up with our time, but I want to share a few things extra. Is it okay? Yes. Okay, good. Right, I want to go through the rest of New Start. Exercise. I'm just going to mention that it has been shown to reduce the inflammation in your gut if you exercise. It improves your microbiome diversity, it improves your gut motility, improves your perfusion of your gut, and if you go for a 10-minute walk after a meal, It improves your digestion, your comfort, and your blood sugar levels. Leave it there. Water. We all know your gut needs to be well hydrated. If you're dehydrated, you're going to be constipated, right? So especially as you increase your fiber intake, your gut is going to want to keep more water in. So make sure that you drink enough water. Then I want to talk about sunlight. Okay, so we've done N, nutrition, exercise for E, water for W, yeah, and now S, sunlight. More than your vitamin D, which we all know is very important, and I'm not going to dive into that much now, is the infrared rays of the sun. The heat that you feel on your body. We know that those infrared rays actually penetrate your body. It penetrates deeply into your body, and it is hugely beneficial. It reduces inflammation significantly. And it also supercharges your mitochondria. So get some infrared light on. And then that early morning exposure to sunlight. Just 10 minutes of sunlight into you don't have to stare into the sun, but bright light into your eyes actually releases serotonin, both in your brain and into your gut. So that's a very good kickstart for your day, is to get enough sunlight in. Temperance. What does temperance mean? It basically restricts what is bad and be moderate in what is good. And here I just want to mention that we have spoken about avoidance of sugar. We want to just tell you that high salt intakes, and I'm not talking like a little bit of sauerkraut that is salty. I'm talking in the normal processed diet that most people eat is extremely high in salt. It reduces your gut microbiome diversity. And then we have mentioned alcohol. So, but here is the point. Do what you can. Make good choices as far as you can. And that occasional little slip up that you have, or you know that you have an event and you know you're not going to eat well at that event, that is usually then offset by the good choices that you make around that. Okay, so we don't have to deprive ourselves of absolutely everything. And do what you can that is manageable for you. Because some people will dive in and go like, I have to do this and this and this and this and this and this, and then after a week they're like, too much, I give up. Rather start with one thing at a time and just introduce it into your life and see what a difference it makes, and then take the next thing so it is manageable and you actually make progress. So just continue to make progress. Okay, so air. This is an interesting one because we know that air pollution actually through the gut-lung axis, because of course there will be a gut-lung axis, actually can cause inflammation in your gut as well. But here is something I want to show you, tell you importantly. Our diaphragms is innervated by your vagus nerve as well. Phrenic nerve and vagus nerve also passes through there. So if you take nice, big, deep breaths, you actually stimulate your vagus nerve. And your vagus nerve is what calms us down, right? Because it's your rest and digest nerve. So it also aids to our better digestion. So that's that deep breath every now and again. And a big thing is our postures. Okay, most of us hunch like this because we are here on our phones, right? We have that hunching posture. The secret is, remember, who can remember what's the secret? I said that in our cancer talks. Sternum up. All you have to do is just lift your sternum. That's a ballerina trick. Just lift the sternum and you will feel how much better you're actually taking air into your lung. Okay, so I want to go over to rest. Your circadian rhythm is essential. 50% of the bugs in your gut actually follows the circadian rhythm. They shut down when the sun goes down. So if you eat late meals, you're going to burden your gut with the poor microbes are trying to sleep and you are giving them work to do, right? So even our gut microbes follow the circadian rhythm, and we know that all our organs in our body do better if we are in a rhythm. So an important thing is melatonin secretion. Many of you may know about melatonin. That's basically a neurotransmitter that is secreted when it becomes dark. It makes us sleepy and it induces sleep. But it's also extremely strong antioxidant. So strong, 30 times more stronger than vitamin E, which we know is a very strong antioxidant. So if you go to bed after 10 o'clock at night, you are cutting your melatonin in half. Okay, and we know that our shift workers, we all have done that if you're in the medical field, you are actually doing yourself no favors. It causes shift work. If you're out of sleep, if you change time zones when you're a traveler, you disrupt your gut barrier. It is shown over and over again, and it's actually thought now that jet lag is not simply just your brain, it's actually an inflammatory response in your body because of your gut barrier that's been completely messed up. Okay, so it's very important for us to sleep well, to watch our stress levels. If you have cortisol that is peaking outside of its normal pattern of peak at about 10 o'clock in the morning and settling down at 10 o'clock at night, it actually moves from having an anti-inflammatory effect to a pro-inflammatory effect. So we need to watch our stress levels. We need to take time to be. And we as a family, for instance, we have chosen to keep the Sabbath. Every week, we shut down for a day. We spend time with church family or with friends. We go for walks in nature. We spend time together. Sometimes we will just rest. And it makes a huge difference in our lives. So look after yourself. Get enough R&R, rest and relaxation in. Trust is the T. We do know that massive link between our minds and our guts. And I can just tell you from a personal experience that quiet time in the morning with my Creator resets my day completely. And I want to encourage each one of you to take that time. It makes a massive difference in our lives. And if we have someone that we can trust in, then we also know that it doesn't matter what comes our way, we can handle it. And our stress levels generally are much, much lower. So, to heal your gut, here are the steps. Firstly, I want to tell you, if you have gut issues, you must exclude serious pathology. If you are a male over 45 and a female over 50, you must go for your colonoscopy. Okay, don't ignore what your body is telling you. Early diagnosis increase your chance for healing so much better. So please don't just ignore what your body is telling you. Take it seriously. The second thing is think big picture. Don't focus in on one thing. Because we tend to go like, oh, now I need vitamin D, and then everything goes about vitamin. Oh, no, what about omega-3s? And then we hyper-focus on one thing. Try and keep the big picture of your health in mind, and remember that there are opportunity costs that we've discussed. For every choice that you make, you are either losing out on something else, or you are making a better choice than you would have. So you have that chance with every choice that you make. Think about opportunity costs with your health. Eat more plants that we've spoken about so much. Start low and go slow. And very importantly, listen to your body. If you are busy making changes and you find, you know what, this is not working, this what I've just been doing is causing me some trouble, then I would suggest that you maybe just take one step back and say, okay, this has not worked for me. Let me take one step back. Maybe wait a few more days, or rather introduce something else and I'll try that thing again later. Learn to listen to what your body tells you. And I want to skip down the list. I should have put it with that. And that is do one thing at a time. Otherwise, you're not going to know what's helping your gut. If you start everything together and you are now taking this and this and this and this and this, how do you know what is causing problems and what is actually helping? So start with one thing and slowly build up over time. Most of us, if we have gut issues, it hasn't happened overnight. It's taken many years to get there. Similarly with all our other health issues, whether it's autoimmune disease or whatever, it hasn't happened overnight. And so the process of getting back to normal is also often a slow one. Allow for a transition time where you may experience a little bit of discomfort. It must just not be severe, but just tolerate it and see what happens. But once again, listen to your body. Consider excluding dairy for a period of time. Some people tolerate dairy well, but many people, if you actually just exclude dairy, that one simple thing makes a massive difference in their gut health. So just consider it. And if you're then unsure whether it was really the dairy that made the difference, put it back in and see what happens. Okay. But then I want to just say, a complete exclusion diets, I want to re-emphasize, is not a good thing because you're giving up a whole lot of good nutrition. Dairy, you know how I feel about that. Consider the FODMAPs. If you, we actually have a WhatsApp group that you're welcome to join. It's a very quiet group. Those of you on it knows it's only admins that can post. We keep it very quiet and low key. But if you're interested, I can place a list of the low FODMAP and the high FODMAP foods on there, and you can start experimenting with that. I've mentioned one at a time. And then it's not just about food. It's the whole lifestyle, the whole new start approach. You will find that if you do all these other things, it will benefit your whole body, but your gut as well. And then lastly, I just want to quickly mention supplements because people are going to ask. I am not a massive supplement fan, but also this is something that should be done. Just the best thing is first to test and then to add if necessary, especially vitamin D. Everybody should really check their vitamin D levels because most people are vitamin D deficient. And then you need guided supervision to bring your vitamin D up. But what is also shown to be good for your gut is magnesium. It helps with the motility. So, and not just the motility, also with the enzymatic function. So that is something to consider. And then a period of zinc. Zinc is very good for all mucous membranes, but also remember with zinc, it's a metal. It can accumulate over time, so that will be a period of zinc. But once again, I won't do all of it at once because if I react, I won't know which one is it. So I will try them one by one, and best is to actually do it under the guidance of a practitioner. Okay, now this, what I've just shared with you, really applies to any gut issue, any inflammatory issue, any autoimmune disease. I've just had someone, where are you, who just came and told me that she had Crohn's disease as a young person, and with dietary intervention, she's been Crohn's, there you are, she's been Crohn's free for many, many, many years with no relapse. It can be done, okay? And then I want to encourage you to add rather than just to exclude, because otherwise it becomes too difficult sometimes to do these things. And then look at progress over perfection, okay? Just because sometimes we get so moedeloos with ourselves because we're like, oh my goodness, why did I eat this chocolate now again? Just look at gentle progress and be gentle with yourself. Forgive yourselves for those little relapses. Okay, so I hope that you were amazed by how amazing your body is. And in summary, for me, I have come to the conclusion that if we move back to the original design, we will be okay. If you go look, everything that we've discussed are things that was put in creation. When God created us, He put us in a garden and said, eat plants. So move back to original design, and I think we will be able to get rid of a lot of diseases in our lives. So as I've mentioned, we do have a WhatsApp group. We will send out a link from the number that you have done your booking through, or this is the number of the WhatsApp if you wanted to send a request, but we will put this, we will send it out to you if you wanted to join, so that we can place some information on there for you and that we can keep you up to date with future programs. And we are considering at some point doing a little bit of a health challenge, just to help us all to stay on track, but that will be in a few weeks' time. Okay, so thank you again for coming, and please, you're welcome to still hang around a little bit and chat, and we are so pleased that we can see all of you here.